Here's our next listening example. Hopefully you've listened to this one already. It's very short, so it's really worth listening to, and it's easy to listen to as well. This is the Trio Sonata in A minor, Opus 3, number 10 by Arcangelo Corelli. Just a little history on the piece. It was written in 1689, so right smack dab in the middle of the period. It's a great example of one of the forms of music written during this period. The piece was written for 2 violins and basso continuo. So in other words, it has 2 instruments playing in the upper range that play the melody, and it has 2 lower range instruments playing the harmony and occasionally little parts of the melody. It's a piece that's very easy to perform and easy to arrange for other instruments. This type of music was very popular in the courts in particular because they could be short movements put together in larger groups, they could be long pieces of music or short, and they were full of dance feels and they made you very happy to listen to for the most part. So it was great background music when you were eating and drinking with your friends at the courts. In order to really understand the piece, you need to know 2 vocab words. You need to know what a sonata is, and then more particularly, what a trio sonata is. A sonata, it's very simple. All it is a piece of music for 1 to 8 instruments. That's it. Before this, most music had the voice incorporated into it. So those pieces were called cantatas, which literally means a piece of sung music. We'll talk a little bit more about those next week. In this case, sonata means a piece of music that's written for an instrument or group of instruments. That's it. A trio sonata is a type of sonata. It's a type of sonata that has 3 melodic lines, hence the name trio, 3. But it's a bit confusing because there are actually 4 musicians that play trio sonatas. Every trio sonata has 3 melodic lines, but has 4 performers playing the music because you usually have 2 solo high-range instruments, such as the 2 violins in this case, and you have the 1 melodic line written for basso continuo, which is a group of 2 players. Remember, it's a keyboard instrument player and a bass instrument player. So you always have 4 players, even though it's called a trio. Don't forget that. It's actually very important to how the music sounds, and it might come back up on your exam. There are 2 types of sonatas, or categories of trio sonatas, that we talk about in the Baroque period. And this will make sense once you read about what they are. The sonata da camera was music written for the courts, instrumental sonatas written for the courts. They were written for the parties and so have a very dance-like quality to them. Sonata da chiesa, chiesa literally meaning church, was a sonata written for a church setting. They were more solemn and dignified and were much more suited to a church environment than to a party. Sonatas have these 2 labels, as do trio sonatas. So let's listen to a little bit of our Arcangelo Corelli sonata. So that was the opening introduction to the first fast movement. You saw a few things. You saw in the score, when you watched the video, the label vivace, which means fast, as you learned before. Now, it doesn't sound very fast to us, but it's actually written quite fast. All of those dotted rhythms and all the shorter notes move by very quickly. Did you hear any dynamics? There aren't very many. You don't hear the contrast with dynamics. Like I said, Corelli never really wrote dynamics into his score for a reason. He didn't really believe that you needed to do so because the music should have one mood and should not really have many dynamics at all. The only dynamic in this entire trio sonata is on the last page of music in the last movement. beginning of the second movement, which is much faster tempo than the other one. It's a bright allegro, and it's very much like a dance. It's really interesting to hear the differences between these short movements because it really portrays how every particular movement has its own melody and own idea, and so it's very unified within itself, but there's contrast between every movement. This second movement is just like the fugue that we listen to on the organ by Bach. It has a subject, and it has many different it has 3 different voices actually that enter at different times with that particular subject. So this is polyphonic music. Now the third movement is a very slow song-like movement, and the fourth is actually in binary form. So I challenge you to go back and listen to those again and see whether, especially with the fourth movement, can you find the A section and the B section that we talked about before. That's all we're going to talk about with this particular sonata. Because it is so short, I think it's pretty easy for you to understand how it's formed. If you've got some more questions, feel free to let me know and get in touch with me. Let's move on to our last listening examples. Be careful, this one's a little bit different. This is 3 separate listening examples that make up one entire piece. I chose to do this because I wanted you to be able to see one of the movements has a visual score so that you can understand how the music is moving along. The other 2 movements simply show pretty pictures of springtime while you're listening. It's a very different experience to listen to the first movement of spring with the graphic score than it is to listen to the other 2 where you simply have beautiful art to look at that make you imagine the springtime that Vivaldi wants you to be thinking about. So listen to examples 5, 6, and 7 please before you move on to the next listening lecture.